Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by retired AC Assistant Chief Jonni Redick. Johnny, ma'am, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't got to call me ma'am.
I know, it's just so hard. I think, I don't know if it was because I was raised in the South originally. Everyone was certain ma'am, so that was really hard to shake. For years when I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, where all my friends' parents were like, seriously, stop calling Mr. or Mrs. whatever. But then, yeah, even coming to law enforcement culture, I just always had a strong respect for the rank. You always hear that cynical, like, well, I respect the rank, not the person sometimes. But no, it's a big deal. And it's not just AC level, but in an agency as big as the CHP. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that respect. I do. I think I was referring more to ma'am, like, when I see my elders, I go, yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Let me get that for you, ma'am. And so, but I am, reaching that age mark where I guess I should be okay with ma'am. But, I'm one of those two where I'm a grandmother, but my grandson calls me Gigi. I'm too cool to be grandma completely just yet. So,
You kind of are too cool. Yeah, you are too cool. My wife and I have that like label where we look at people. Sometimes it's celebrities, sometimes it's people we know. We're like, they're a little too cool in such a good way. In the ways that
well,
like
thank you. I
I
receive
wish I
it.
was too cool.
I receive it. I'm going to
Okay,
receive that, Eric.
good. Well, we were before the before the recording, we were kind of just recounting, how we became acquainted, and that was through Lexipol had a recruiting seminar, and I was invited to be on there as a panelist along with you and a couple esteemed others that may or may not join us on podcast. Actually, Mr. Jim Dudley is scheduled to come
Oh,
on,
cool.
and then I have some hesitation from another one, so we'll see. But all to say, I was super humbled to be brought in into that. I write about recruiting for Police One, or I have written about it and culture and a lot of these intersecting topics. But I had a little bit of I don't know if the word is imposter syndrome, maybe the phrase, but when I looked at some of your intros and bios, including yours, I was like, man, I'm just a sergeant, like over here doing this thing, and I'm going to be on this, essentially on this stage with these figures that have done huge things in policing and continue to do huge things even in retirement directly related to the profession. But it was a very gratifying experience, and I just feel so grateful to be acquainted with you and the other figures, as far as being able to glean and learn from you and that mentorship and some of the things you said and how you said them. It was very apparent to me that I wanted to keep you in my connection circle, and I'm really excited to be able to share you with my audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very, 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 very kind. And so right before we got on, we were chatting about something, and I was like, okay, I want to kind of put that in my little brain to make sure I bring up. So we were talking about how your self confidence kind of has started blooming like in your late 30s, and you wish that it would have kind of showed up sooner. And I was just sharing the experience that, that's not uncommon. I felt that as well. And depending on those environmental factors, some people will have it sooner than others. Some of us have to develop that self confidence so that we know that we have value in the spaces that we're in. And so when you just were talking about me and kind of at the time you were a sergeant, now you have promoted, but
Mm-hmm.
you used the word just. And a lot of us use that just in front of ourselves, like it minimizes ourselves. And so I just want to say, as you were saying all those wonderful accolades about me, I was like, man, when I saw you and heard you talking about the things you were talking and the way you saw um, the connectivity of you call it intersectionality, and I those terms are kind of big for some people. who could be listening. So I just want to say the way you create these connection of the way the dots come together and they all kind of circle around and they cross one another. And you were using some examples, and I was like, man, this guy's the future. I was like, this is the type of leadership and the personality and the aptitude along with the attitude that we need in policing today, because you're outside the box, but you speak about outside the box and you do it comfortably and confidently. And this goes back to that space of where you're feeling more confident, where you are in your space of your career, but also your maturation process. And so when I look at where we are today in law enforcement and specifically around leadership and how we are dealing with our front line, first line, officers that are in the field doing the work, we miss the mark on really what I say equipping them with not just those mandatory skills that they need to be able to write reports, fight crime, and do all those things, but we miss the mark relative to a couple of things. One of that is mental health and resilience, and then the other one is leadership development. Because if we invested in our people from recruiting, onboarding on in leadership development, we might build more self-confident people early on who then are willing to share their innovative ideas and their thoughts, but we also build that resilience for the mental health part. Because if we don't equip them well enough in advance, then when they start hitting these cumulative marks, this trauma that's going to be happening,
Mhm.
um, then we're behind the curve, right? So there's this new thing that's the curve. I think it's called Curve with Simon Sinek and several other early adopter chiefs that have come on board, but we can do this in policing and it doesn't take much, but it takes intentionality. So what I appreciate about you is that's what you are. You are an intentional person. And I love that because you stay consistent with it.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, so the maturation process, I feel it. And if this was 10 years ago, I'd probably be, of the response of no, 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 thank you. But no, and I will accept and receive your compliment because yeah, that's part of it. That's part of the thing, and trying to deny what you're doing. And I appreciate that. And even when I said, just a sergeant, there's nothing like I recognize like the line level and the sergeants are so impactful on the day to day. A lot of times they're the ones driving culture in this more impactful and permeating way. And so even then, in that statement, that was my mental space in the time. I was like, man, I'm just a sergeant. But I recognize literally, as being an early young sergeant, when I first was promoted like 5, 6 years ago, I felt like all the answers had to come from above, right? Like I was trying to beat the drum and trying to lead up or trying to get certain ears. But then through my sergeant career, I was like, no, a lot of it's here. And then finding that recognition now, just recently being promoted to command staff, I'm like, no, it's the sergeants that, wield the power, right? It's the FTOs, it's the informal leaders, all these senior officers. And if they're cut of the right cloth and they have the right, intentionality, like you say, that's the difference maker. Not to take anything away from command staff or the uppers, the executives. They're all
You're
part of the
right.
picture.
But it's okay. So you have been helpful for me. I've been doing research, right? And so my research is looking at women in law enforcement that have 5 years or less to look at those factors that will influence and nurture or encourage them
Hmm.
to promote into leadership roles. And I want to say that I'm going to make a 95% direct supervision is extremely influential. Now, it's influential both ways. It is 100% out of them all influential for them to feel like they've created conditions for their success, where they feel supported, and supported looks like a lot of different things. So, Sergeant can really feel like they're doing a great job because they never say anything really negative about their employees. But how often do you say something positive? How often are you giving them affirmations daily, and not just, empty affirmations, but you actually showed up on scene. So
Hmm.
while you're on scene, you're like, you know what, you handled this really well. Or even maybe in your muster or your briefings or whatever you call them, you are bringing that up again and you're intentional about following up with that. And then maybe you even go as far as to write a comment. So everybody has a different feedback system and annual praise system, but make those marks on those monthlies or quarterlies or whatever that is, because they want it in the moment, but they also want the follow up to that, because those follow ups for them build confidence, build that being seen, build that value. And then you add the layer of maybe you check in because you notice they're a little off, right? The mental health part of the check in. And you don't just go, hey, how are you doing, and move on. You spend a couple of seconds or a couple of
Mm-hmm.
minutes and you really try to figure out, hey, are they okay? Take them to a private place and have a conversation. This is what I'm hearing from not just the women that I'm doing research, that just happens to be the research that I'm doing, but
Mm-hmm.
this is employees. They want to be affirmed, they want to be validated, and they want to know that you really care. So your direct supervisor is absolutely essential, key. It was my favorite, favorite position, but it was also my most nerve wracking because I have to be a risk manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you talk about it when you get to be management, but you're still a risk manager because you are the first line supervision. So you care about your people, you're trying to protect them. But sometimes when we're trying to protect them, we are also not protecting them. Because if
Mm-hmm.
we don't hold them accountable and we don't keep them within policy and under that umbrella of protection, sometimes we are putting them in harm's way. And so it's a balance. And so when you're a sergeant, man, you are so extremely important. You matter to the relationships that bridge for your employees to command, for them to see them. So if you're pissy and upset with the command or the lieutenant, your people are going to be pissy and upset with the lieutenant. But if you build a healthy relationship and perspective that's balanced, can be truthful. You don't have to, sugarcoat anything or cover up stuff, but you need to be fair and balanced because you're influencing those that are below you. And therefore, they can't have a better relationship with you, Eric, because their sergeant doesn't care for you. And they're always talking about command. And then they want to see you. They want to see you in the field, believe it or not. They want it.
Yeah.
I had one say, man, I loved how my commander was out there when they first promoted. It was so awesome. And then all of a sudden, we just never saw them again.
Yeah.
Don't know what happened, but never saw them again.
Yeah. I think it's not intentional, but it is a lack of intention, right? And so there are administrators in command that are better at popping in or, interacting, and that's definitely a continual challenge that I'm struggling with at times because your inbox is always full, right? And I think most people recognize that even as an officer, your inbox is full these days with just all this random stuff, right? New direction, crime updates, this and that. Oh, you forgot to do this admin task. Okay, cool. File that away. Get to it. Oh, a voicemail. And so it just expands, with every level because your job is more administrative in nature with every rank promotion, right? And so just to recognize like, hey, there is value there. I think even the most cynical of the line level, they still want to see their boss. They still want to see the number one or the number two ranker because if they don't, they so notice it, right? And even if it's just showing up and no one has anything to say or any questions, it's so huge. And I remember directly, as a sergeant, I was trying to ask my assistant chief to come to briefings more. And his response was like, are you kidding me, man? Like, no one wants to see me. And I was like,
They
sir, I wouldn't be
do.
asking. Yeah, I was like,
They
there's value.
do.
Yeah.
They do. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of they really, really, really do. So I promoted to assistant chief and I was in the Bay Area, and Bay is huge, a lot of commands, but I had come up in the Bay Area as an officer. So there was people that I knew and they were now my commanders. And so I spent a lot of time with them. I would go to their commands. I knew some of the officers and sergeant that were still working in there. I mean, these are hundreds of folks. So how am I supposed to get around all the time? But I made it like my mission. I made it my mission. Yes, I got stuff in my in basket. I got the governor, and we got all kind of things that are going on. But it was like anything else that was on my calendar. That was planned time. Sometimes I could
Mm-hmm.
do it spontaneously, but planned time. But then when I came over to Valley Division, which is our Sacramento, greater Sacramento region, all the way to Tahoe, it's huge. Um, I had a command way out, and it was South Lake Tahoe. And so now you add snow, mountains, and I mean they are like out there.
Yeah.
But they were my command. And so I was like, all right, I go out there, at least once a quarter. And so the first time I went out there, it was during their training day, and going over stuff, talking to people, and I go, okay, what do you got for me? And somebody first said, well, for one, we can't believe that you came out here.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I? They go, we haven't had an assistant chief out here, and I've been here 15 years. And I'm like, well, shame on them. I
Hmm.
said, they go, I said, well, how does it feel? I was like, I was just being myself. Like, how does it feel?
Yeah.
They go, it feels okay. I'm like, okay, well, we're both okay, nothing to fear, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes they worry, like, why are you coming out? What are we not
Hmm.
doing?
Yeah.
And then I was like, so share with me what's happening. How can I help the command? What resources do you guys feel? I mean, I talked to your commander, but I want to hear from you too. And the biggest, you would think you would hear like things that are like huge, but no. They were talking about radio reception. They have
Hmm.
dead spots and they can't get anybody to come out and check those because that's officer safety. And I'm like, well, I haven't heard that. I said, you know what? I'll get our headquarters IT folks on it as soon as I leave. I'll make a note. There was a couple of other small things. And literally, because I followed up and had somebody come out and address that and fix those, you would think that I had gave everybody a pay raise, but all
Hmm.
I did was give them time, listened, and then I took action based on what I could. Right, other things the commander's going to have to work over time to get whatever they need. But some of that stuff, I'm like, well, nobody has really sent that up as a concern. Now, does that put the commander on a little bit of like accountability blast? Well, yeah. Well, then you
Hmm.
know that I'm listening, I'm paying attention. They know that I am. So now maybe you're going to level up your game too. And then the second example I want to give you was when I was an officer, I had a new captain that came in, and I guess the command was maybe 150 or 135, I think, people. And so his mission, he was a young captain. Man, you make me think of him, Eric. Actually, he was a young captain, and he wanted to do a ride along with all of us. Well, some of us, I think I had like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years on, but I felt salty because I was in a urban command, a lot of turnover. So I had seniority already,
Hmm.
FTO, all these things. I was like, I don't want to ride with no captain. I don't want to ride with him. So my sergeant said, you will get out there and you will get your car ready and the captain will be out shortly. And I was
It's
like,
happening. Yeah.
he got in the car and he rode with me, and I was a little rigid probably for the first few minutes or so, but I felt like he was coming to check out me. Like, am I a bad police officer? Am I somebody not doing a good job? And he just came out to be human with me,
Hmm.
asking me how I like my job, what brought me into the career. Do I have kids and family, which I did. And he just talked to me like a person. We made traffic stops. He got out and had my back. I think we went to a collision. He did the 180, the report to tow the car. He was my beat. He was riding with me like a partner.
Hmm.
And then I had to turn him over, and I didn't want to release him to the next person because I was having
Yeah.
so much fun.
That's good.
But that captain went on to be the commissioner of the California Highway Patrol for almost 10 years.
Oh wow.
And what he taught me when I became a captain and my first promotion to captain was back to that command where I was an officer and he was my captain, was I did ride-alongs with every single one of my officers, and it changed the relationship that they had with me and I had with them. And it was absolutely fantastic. Now, sometimes you can't do that when you have a big command, but you can charge different people to go out and do that kind of regularly. And it makes a huge difference to them. And it definitely makes a difference to you and your leadership and how you see them.
Yeah, I love that. Right, it's usually like the simple thing. It's the low hanging fruit, and everything you explain, the examples and the specifics. I hear just showing up. Right, like officers need to be seen, and they need to be heard. They need to be validated. But simply showing up and saying like, "Hey, what do you need? What can I help you with?" Right, rather than, "Hey, I'm here to say this, and this is what's coming, and here's the new change." And I fault, I fall to that, right? Because oftentimes there is so much change and there are a lot of things to communicate, but with some intentionality, right? Planning, like you literally had to put in a schedule. That's a big deal. Like I was recently picking the brain of my deputy chief, and I was like, "You have so much going on," and we go back. But a lot of my thing was just trying to ask him how does he manage these conversations and giving people time, because he's really good at it, right? And he shows up and he has a lot of trust. And the question was essentially like, how do you balance literally all these projects you're clearly working on? Because I see them, I see it on paper, I see the plans. How do you do that? And it's just recognizing for him, he's like, I got to give the time, and then I have to trust that that time is an investment. So, every conversation is useful because everyone's an integral part of the team, and they're going to carry out their piece. But then I'm going to shut myself away and like work on this thing for however many hours. So yeah, I think it is such a balance, and I love the examples you gave there.
Yeah, I love that he has that, like you said, those healthy boundaries for how he needs to manage his time. Because we can get into, leadership, command leadership, and executive leadership, and we can just literally kill ourselves. And there's been days like that where I've literally just like, I'm so mentally exhausted and taxed, but never too taxed for my people. If they're coming into my office, I put my stuff down. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
answering those phones. I'm giving them their time. They
Yeah.
used to tease me because I had it wasn't a full on couch in my executive office,
Oh
but it
yeah.
was a short one. And they would knock on the door and they'd go, Chief, can I sit on Oprah's couch for just a minute? I need to share something with you. And I go, absolutely, come on in. What do you
Yeah,
got? I
just
mean, I've
don't
had
jump on it. Don't pull a Tom Cruise
no, but
for
they'd
people that
come
remember
in
that.
and, they'd be going through difficult relationship things like divorces or illnesses with their family members, or, we had experienced, of course, officer involved incidents, and they'd come in and they just want to just kind of breathe. My commanders, my clerical staff would come in and they'd be challenged with, I got this appointment or that appointment, but I got to get this done. I'm like, it's okay. How can we have somebody, back you up and support that? Is it required right now by headquarters? Can we wait? Just that space to allow people to come in, even though we've got something pressing, right? But I know in my mind how to manage that. And so if I just handle them with the calmness that they need, then
Mm-hmm.
that allows them to go be empowered and feel encouraged to just be able to go and get whatever they need to get done, manage themselves. Because when I think about the machinery of an organization, the machine does not run without the people. And the
Mm-hmm.
people is not me. I can be replaced instantly. And the example is, as soon as I decided to retire, people were like, "Oh my God, oh my God!" But my replacement was picked the last day that I was even gone.
Yeah.
So we can be replaced. So we can't put so much like importance on who we are and what we do to forget that the people that work in the organization are truly, truly the ones that make the machine work, because they're not going anywhere. When we move up into executive leadership, we're going to stay or go, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
time window looks like. But for the most of them, they've got another 10, 15, 20, 30 years that they're going to be there. And how healthy do we want them to be? And how do we want to support them? I mean, those are the funnest times for me, is to go on ride-alongs with them, show up at a scene that isn't a critical incident that I have to be the
Yeah.
incident commander, right?
Yeah.
But I get to go and I can just be like, hey, let me move some traffic along. Let me go over here and get the media back. Let me, because we still have that training. We still know how to do the job. I may not do it as well. I probably can't write a report very well, but I know how to interact, handle people, and help manage scene and support my people. And most of us, when we're in, command or executive leadership, lieutenants, we're driving state vehicles. We're in some kind of a state car. So when I'm traversing meetings, I hear on the radio stuff going down. I'm like, Valley 3's en route. I'm en route to that thing because I know that my last two beat officers are probably tied up on that collision or that call, and they're going to be delayed getting to this. So Valley 3 is rolling. Can you start me a tow truck? Go ahead and, start, all those things, because I still know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we remove ourselves from the field, we can get a little anxious about being out there too. Like,
For sure.
but if you go out there and make that a thing, they see that, man. But it also reminds you of the coolness of why you joined the department too.
Yeah, I love that. And there's, I think you identified different layers, right? Because I have heard officers around my same hire time, right? Like line level, that are like, it would be really cool is if command staff humped a beat for a 12-hour shift. So they really remembered. I was like, dude, I hear you, But my own opinion is no, because do you know how much time it's going to take for us to do what you do so quickly and smoothly? And I love the balance of it. You're riding along, right? You
Yeah.
can be a good back, but do you want that person to take the lead on like a DUI investigation involving a blood warrant? You're going to be asking like the local FTO to basically piggyback and shadow them, and it's just a total, and I don't mean there to be emotion in here, but like it is a cumulative waste of time, essentially. But there are other ways, right? And people can
Yeah,
essentially,
you can't go out and take a beat. I mean, I suppose
some people have,
if you
and
got
it's
bare
impressive.
bones staffing, everybody's got to chip in and go out and do what you
Hmm.
can. But the expectation shouldn't be that they come work a beat, but they should definitely. You're still a sworn officer. You should definitely get out there and hit the pavement every now and then. They should see you. And I had great mentors and leaders that were above me, and they'd be out there. And I was like, I want to be just like that. I don't want to be
Hmm.
somebody that they never see. They don't, and not everybody's your fan, right? So when you take on command, command leadership over commands, I'd say that was probably my biggest challenge was when I was a commander. I was a command of two different commands as a captain. And the first command absolutely loved me, supported everything. I was good to them. They were good to me, and we did great work. The second command I went to, I was asked to go there. And so, Highway Patrol is huge. We're all across the entire state of California. We
Yeah,
have over 100 commands. We have 9 field divisions. And so you can work anywhere in the great, great state of California. I mean, 40 million people almost.
yeah.
And the second command that I went to, I was asked to go there because they had their captain had retired and they hadn't had command leadership for several months. A lieutenant was acting and running the command, so things were kind of going off the guardrails there. I didn't want to go because I had a really sweet command. I was pretty complacently content with what I
Hmm.
had, but I accepted the challenge because they needed it. And so when I went there, I had a small segment of people that were just opposed to management, period. It was an us versus them like battle. It was battle royale with this small group. And again, my command there was probably 140 people. And it was the biggest challenge that I ever had. And when I say that, it's because you can have folks that just dig in and they're extremely resistant, and you truly believe that it's because of you. And I did until we had a loss of one of our officers. It was a line of duty death. It was early morning. He was shot and murdered, and we're in a very prominent kind of affluent area. So I mean, it hit the media. It was hard to let everybody know because social media and everything else puts that out, so
Yeah,
everybody took it in different ways. It was extremely devastating. Well, that incident had so many complexities to it. However, what also came out of it was an opportunity for me as a commander to have to face probably the second most difficult thing. That was the first most difficult. And then line of duty deaths continued to happen. You know, as a chief, you get those more exponentially because you have more commands and more people.
yeah. Hmm.
But what came out of the opportunity was I made myself available in a meeting for all of staff that wanted to be there with the union rep. So we were unified to come together because we'd had all this stuff before the incident, and then stuff was still brewing after the loss of our officer, and it was just dividing the command, and it was just making things very hard for people to feel comfortable and wanted, because you had a section of people that just wanted to do their job, and then you had this group that wanted to hold everybody hostage.
Sure.
And I went in and took the arrows for the day. And it was tough because I told them, yeah, here I am. What do you have? Share whatever you want, say whatever you want. And they attacked me in every which way for my leadership. They attacked me every which way for coming in. And some of the things that they were saying, I don't think they understood until later, for requiring us to be at a training day for the whole time, because previous commander let them come in, do a couple hours training day, and then they could read policy later
Mm.
or
Hmm.
whatever that stuff is. And I was like, yeah, we have a lot of training to do. It's not possible. And so I would make my commander's hours at the end of the day versus the beginning because that required them to be there. So that would upset them. I needed to change how we were allocating resources because our staffing was low. So we had people able to go and report in different parts of the area at different times, but there was no accountability to what are you doing out there because supervisors let them. My sergeants were taking vacations at the same time. So we had no sergeant on day shift, even though I have two, they
Hmm.
both would take vacation at the same time. And so we'd have an officer in charge. That's not their job. Your job as a sergeant is to create a schedule where we have coverage. But this is the kind of command, along
Yeah.
with misconduct and a bunch of other things. And so on that day, I thought I was going to hear a lot more of that, but I didn't. What I After they got off of kind of beating me up a little bit, they moved into past pains that they had felt from being overlooked, not seen, how division felt they were the black sheep because they didn't feel like they were given certain opportunities that other commands were when things were happening. People weren't being promoted out of the command I was in now. How can somebody with 10 or 15 years not get promoted? But you look at the list and all these people in the other command. So all this past hurt and pain was
Hmm.
coming out. And in those moments, I was like, I've got work to do that's different than what I thought I was coming in to do. But I had to allow that opportunity to take all of what they had to say, and I had to manage it because here's the mental health and the health resiliency part for them, because I know they were also hurting from the loss of our officer.
Yeah.
And they were hurting from accumulative things that they felt were directed at them personally, but I also had to manage my resilience in the moment because I had been attacked since I got there, constantly undermined. And this whole line of duty death experience was very hard, very difficult. You hurt for the family. I've got to, manage all of those components of, he had children. It was just parents, all of those things. And then I have hurting officers, and then I have some that are just, doing undermining things. And so the balance with all of that was, for me, how do I heal my supervisors so that they can heal my officers, right? Because they vocalized themselves in that opportunity too, which was unique. And so what I did was, you know how you have your critical incident stress debriefings and they
Hmm.
work from the boots on the ground up. Well, we had never done them in our commands for lieutenants and captains
Mm.
or included our assistant chiefs and chiefs at that time.
Yeah.
So I requested that. And so we did one with me and my lieutenants and sergeants. And then I asked for one at the executive level for me and any of the rest of the commanders in my division who had came and helped, which were several, and the chiefs, because we felt like there were gaps in places that they didn't meet our needs. And so we were feeling some kind of way about that, and we didn't feel supported. And I will tell you, in the briefing layer for um, me, my sergeants, and my lieutenants, there were things that they felt about each other that they didn't know because they didn't see where everybody was at and what everybody was doing because it was a
Hmm.
very complex dynamic situation. Everybody had different duties and responsibilities, and so some people felt like they weren't showing up. They didn't see me all the time, and they're like, well, Captain, we didn't see you. So I explained, I'm at planning meetings for the funeral. I'm making time to go over and see the family. We've got to coordinate with them. I had to make it to the critical incident stress debriefings just to kick them off and make sure people were there. I'm dealing with division. I've got the commissioner calling because the governor's calling. We're trying to coordinate the time for the funeral with the governor. So they don't know all the complexities of all the planning and all the meetings and all the things that had to go. And then I still have to make time to go home. I have two small children. I have a family, all of those things. And
Yeah.
so it gave an opportunity for everybody to kind of be seen, share their hurts and pains, and to let it out. And then the therapist allowed, that coping and healing and things and strategies. And so the next layer with the chiefs was one that they had never thought about doing. So in that particular one, we had commanders that had had officer involved incidents, whether they were shootings or line of duty desk, that they never had that type of debriefing. We always have an incident debriefing, right? But they didn't have the debriefing, which was the human side for commanders and the chiefs. And in that one, my chiefs, they broke down and cried because not only did they know our officer personally because he had worked in division, they realized where they were lacking to support me as a commander. And they were beating themselves up, unbeknownst to me, on how they had felt like they had failed. And they apologized, and they were just, it just created such a healthy release for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And we were able to move forward differently. And now they offer those, for other commanders. And commanders are now doing that within their commands. And so one of the things that you can pay it forward when you have that, for us, we have middle management training and commanders training in the CHP for anybody who's promoting. And they will bring up commanders who have had experience, especially around employee death. And so that's not just our sworn, but also our non-sworn, and share those experiences so that you're teaching lessons forward. And so I went through my whole line of duty death, from the incident scene management of that to the human side experience, so they can now equip themselves differently for if they have those. And for me, my critical incident part of that was I was en route to the office when this incident happened. I wasn't in the office because it happened early morning, and I'm in commute traffic, and I am physiologically experiencing my own stress, to be like I'm very calm when my sergeants call me because they're screaming, and I'm like, okay, are you driving? No, I have so and so driving. Okay, so okay, well, so breathe. Now
Mm-hmm.
tell me again what's happening. Okay, I want you to carefully get to the scene. When you get to the scene, I want somebody to help you to let me know what's going on. Trying to calm him down, thinking about who do I need to call next? Well, I need to call my assistant chief and let him know, hey, this is what we have. I'm sure you heard it on the air. I'm en route. Well, he gave me nothing other than to say, okay, I'll see you. I'll see you there. Because I think that's where the debrief revealed to me he was processing. He didn't know what to say. So en route, I'm like, okay, I'm not there. I need a captain. Well, we have surrounding commands. So I immediately called two of my peer commanders, and I said to the one, and I looked at the experience of the two and their skill set in my mind. So I sent the one I was most comfortable. He was our Oakland commander at the time. I know he's had many of these, and he's senior. I said, could you please go to the scene and manage the scene? I called my other commander who I felt would be better at my command. I said, can you physically go to my command? Because I'm not going to be at the office, but you're going to have officers responding there. You're going to have media coming there. You're going to have citizens showing up. We got clerical and non-sworn in our dispatch who people are going to need to be supported. And then I had another commander go to the hospital. I said, because I need to have bars and presence when everybody starts to arrive. And I knew they were taking my officer to the hospital because he didn't die on scene. He died in the hospital after. And so in my mind, I'm just trying to manage that the best I can. And I'm thinking, what else is needed? And one of my past mentors, she had promoted and she was in our northern division, which is like Reading and all of that area in our state of California. And she said, hey, Jonni, she said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing okay. She goes, is there anything I can do for you? And I told her everything that I had done. And she goes, that's perfect. She goes, there's one other thing, and I'm going to take care of that for you. But you get there and you get there safely. And I said, thank you. And she goes, I'm going to check back in on you later. I said, okay. And she took care of whatever that thing was. I don't know what the thing was, because right after that, I had commissioners starting to call because governor's calling and people in high places want to know what's happening. And so I don't want to go into it detail, but using your support team of people and not feeling like you have to do it yourself. And then also for your sergeants and your lieutenants. I had a brand new lieutenant and I had an acting lieutenant. And it was like, if you could have this kind of experience with some of your least experienced people in the moment, but they had great hearts and they loved and cared on people, but they were also broken. So I had a lot of healing to help them with as well. But for our department, for the CHP, we also have a team of folks that come from our Office of Employee Safety Assistance, and they come out to support commanders whenever you have line of duty deaths or critical incidents that are significant. And so they activate our peer support team, but they come and they help you to work with the family, to help with the funeral arrangements, to navigate all these things at the governor's office. We brought in our division team to help with the media because that was just significant. And then there's, other state requirements that we have, but we also started receiving flowers and food. And I mean, the whole off, it was beautiful, but you have to manage it along with
Hmm.
these other things. So I know I talked a little bit, Eric, but it was all in my head there.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's a lot to unpack there, and I think that there's a lot of lessons and a lot of tips and just thoughts that people can kind of suss through if they were to listen to it back. But I made a couple notes, and then I think that an overarching theme to all of it is just this recognition of communication, building trust and empathy, right? And we started earlier when you were talking about the intro to this was, coming into command, and essentially like it felt like you were suffering like the sins of the father, right? It was like the old command, it was the old guard, and then people just reading you a certain way or these necessary directions, but they were coming from a place of hurt because line of duty death, right? And then these things that we know are potentially viable, but we just hope they never happen. And we see them happen. We just part of us wishes, and part of us might actually assumptively believe that it's never going to happen here at home, right? In our own little town or our own little precinct. And that was very much a thing, in my experience when we lost a close buddy of mine. I've talked with multiple friends and we're like, man, did you ever really think that it happened to like our department? And we're like, no, like our guys are squared away and they train and all these things, like all these things you can control, but then you just never know. Um, so it's just so shattering, so jarring. But as a leader, I love a lot of the conversations you had, which is, hey, there might be a distance and a lack of direct personal connection with the leaders, but we can ensure that is minimized by having the relationship at each level, right? You talk about caring for your first lines, and then they can care for their officers, and like that modeling is so huge. It's something I talk about and write about because that's all you can really control, right? We even talked about that earlier. Yeah, is it viable for you at the upper echelon of command to ride with every single officer or get to know every single officer? Probably not. And if you did really spend that time, it'd be more than your full-time job, and you have your job to do for their benefit, for the community. So just to say, like, control what you can in your circles. But I also loved how you talked about how you had this SISM, this peer support element for command staff, because it's no surprise. I mean, look at your own command staff, no matter where you are in the country. There's a lot of command that they aren't the beacon of health, right? And you can tell that stress is wearing on them, and it's a different kind of stress. It's not more important than your stress on the day to day in the job, but you have this level of camaraderie that I am recognizing is evaporating at a decent rate, right? Because the circle gets smaller. And I just recently had another guest talk about how it gets lonely at the top, and so our command actually sharing that. And you'd like to think so, but really, in my experience and what I've seen, there's so much command that is worried about your division, right? It's your sole focus. So we do essentially become siloed in these ways, and you're just so much, a slave to the inbox and what have you. So
I don't want you to be a slave to the inbox, though.
no,
Yes, that stuff
exactly,
has to get done.
exactly, yeah.
Absolutely, you do. And so, one of the beautiful things that you can create, anybody who's listening, you can create this, trust me. So, we work really hard to create peer support programs for everybody else in the department, right? Everybody else in the department. But there's the gaps. The gaps are, it's not always for supervisors, it's not always for lieutenants.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee you, most of the time, it's never for commanders and above. But you can create the opportunity when you feel like it is needed. And maybe it needs to be at intervals that don't happen just after a critical incident, because a lot of executives are committing suicide too.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could just have a peer support type of element that you have check-ins with your clinician, right? Just to talk about whatever it needs to be managed, right? And it can be voluntary. People don't necessarily have to do it, but they can do
Yeah.
it if they choose versus just saying, "Oh, we have employee assistance program." they should have, we provide that for them. Why don't they use it? It was so healthy for us to have that. And my peer commanders that, like I said, I had 3 or 4 of them go to different places. There were 3 that attached themselves to me the entire time, this incident. And it took us 10 days to have a funeral for thousands. By the way, I mean, it was just enormous. But they attached themselves and they all had different roles that they did to support me and to protect me and to keep me healthy. I still carry the little note that one of them wrote for me, and it was simple. It says, I will drink water, I will get rest, and I will eat something. And they
Mm-hmm.
placed it in my uniform pocket. And they said, I want you to take a look at that. And I would take a look at everything. Okay, I gotta hydrate, right? Simple stuff because it's just a very
It's
difficult
whirlwind, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's a difficult
Mm-hmm.
experience and so much is going on. But your peers, you can come together and in your own organization, you can create that for your executive and management teams. And it's healthy and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we talk about, right? But we don't necessarily execute it. We
Yeah,
don't execute
absolutely.
it.
Yeah. And that's so key, right? Like talking about the modeling just for command to seek and what they're comfortable with, right? Like sharing, like, hey, I grabbed one of those sessions too. I think you should too, right? Whether it's a peer to peer or, in a small circle, or hey, if you're out there and you're saying, yeah, I utilize therapy, thank goodness I do because this job is a lot. Man, it signals so huge to every level below to be like, okay, boss is into it, then I should be into it too, right? Or I may be into it. There is a part where I want to ask you when you did take on command and you recognized, man, this, I hear just you're just so charismatic and empathetic, and that could hurt when someone is judging you a certain way, simply because you promoted in the spot where you promote because you want to help. You want your role to be different. And you think that you can have a positive influence. What helped you navigate that and remove some of the potentially emotional response, especially for someone that has that degree of empathy?
Well, just to be in transparency to your audience, I feel like the initial parts of those were like you get angry. You get upset. You're like, God, I can't believe that these folks are really doing all this stuff that they're doing. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
we're adults. We get paid a lot of money. I don't got time for like middle school, not
Yeah.
even high school,
Mm-hmm.
middle school nonsense. I mean, this is really how I felt. And I had to get past that because there were so many things that I just would begin to be revealed to me through different conversations from when I initially came in. And I was like, we're going to come in and I'm going to handle this stuff with discipline, right? And I'm like, okay, well, discipline's not going to address the behavioral issues that I'm dealing with. And so I'm going to have to think about how do I bridge the trust relationship because they have no trust with me because they don't know me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had to do that through some of the senior officers that did support me, through the union reps who wanted to improve the morale and, reduce the negativity that was happening in the office because they were doing stuff that I did have to hold them accountable for. I mean, there was people that were misusing overtime. There were people that were, misusing, your workers' comp. I mean, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. So I had to, and misconduct investigations going on for other things, internal investigation. So I had to address those. But for me to be resilient enough, I had to also focus on the bright spots. So if every day I focused on this hard thing that I go in and navigate, I wouldn't want to show up.
Yeah.
I would be
Yeah.
I would be like, okay, somebody else is gonna have to go in and do this job. But I would try to focus on the bright spots. And that would be the officers that I would see come through the hallway. Hey, Captain, good morning. I'm like, hey, good to see you.
Yeah.
How was your day? We had senior volunteers, and these folks were just like angels. They came in, and I had like, I don't know, so many of them. They come from all these different job fields that are high profile, and they want to volunteer their time to the Highway Patrol. And they're always checking in on me because they hear all the stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
My managers, right, trying to lean into some of their wisdom to say, okay, so how do we navigate this one? Because I want to chop their head off, but perhaps chopping their head off isn't the thing I should do. What do you think is best? And they're like, No, they can make you feel like you want to chop their head off. That's a real feeling. But if we want to do this, this is how we should do that.
Yeah.
But then I would get in my car and I would commute home. And those are the moments, like you said, it's very lonely, but I had good peer commanders that I could talk to and it wasn't going to go anywhere. So having
Hmm.
that good confidant is important. But for me, yeah, I'm a spiritual woman. And so for me, mine is faith based. And so in those moments, I would have to just kind of refresh my spirit and remind myself that if this is a true calling, and we have to look at this word calling, calling isn't just to outwardly the work that we do. When we're called to serve, it's literally to serve everyone that we have in our span of influence or that is in our sphere. And so I had to re-remind myself that if I believe that I've been called to lead and I'm in a leadership position and I'm in this command with these kind of things going on, then I have to show up a certain way every day. Even though it's going to be difficult, I have to believe that the little bit that I can do today is going to make a difference for the little bit I'm going to do tomorrow. And over time, it's going to create the change that's needed. And what I'm feeling today isn't going to last forever. And if we have a mindset that reminds ourselves that these are moments, these are experiences, and we can choose how we want to let them seep in and create bitterness in us, create despondence in us, or do we find, like you mentioned earlier on, the positivity, looking for that gratitude in the moments, really looking for affirmations to say you're doing okay. And I got a beautiful text from a young officer who was like, Captain, I see you and I thank you. I so appreciate how you checked in on me the other day, and you're doing a great job. And they didn't have to send that to me,
Yeah.
right? But it's also reminding our officers and our sergeants to support your executive teams because they're people too, and they're not perfect. Man, far from perfect.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
would hope they have good hearts working to do the very best that they can for you guys. So help to see them and also to encourage them in ways that maybe that you don't. I mean, I had a young woman share with me, I was asking, well, do you ever talk to your chief? Because it was a female chief. I was like, do you ever feel comfortable talking to her? She goes, well, no, I mean, she's not like, and I'm like, well, sometimes they're not necessarily thinking about it. So maybe
Hmm.
just walking up and saying hello, or if you're passing the office, say hi. I mean, it makes a big difference to them. It changes the relationship that you might have. But man, we need the same level of support so that we are not what you said, Eric, in silos, feeling like we have to navigate, organizational decisions by ourselves or with a few. That's not how it's supposed to be because that is not a healthy boundary and that is not healthy for us.
Yeah, for sure. You're not going to lose off of trying to improve connection or opening up lanes of communication, right? Recently, and I say recently just because it's been only a few months, but when people have come to me, whether we have a strong relationship or whether it's less established, when they come to me with these problems, and sometimes I'm involved directly with the decision making of that perceived problem or issue, right? My inclination is like I feel attacked, right? Kind of like you were saying earlier. But then I recognize, hey, the fact that they're coming to me and having this communication, I need to validate them. I need to thank them because that's trust, right? We know what the opposite is. It's not coming to me and it's spreading rumors or whatever it's gonna be. But the fact that they are coming to me recognizes and highlights the fact that they see that I could be part of the solution, or they at least are willing to have the conversation. So I think that's huge for new leaders or just people in a different role of influence, whether it's sergeant, captain, what have you, is that it could seem a certain way at first, but when you really take a step back and you look at what it is, like you should cherish that, right? Because the opposite is terrible. And that's like exactly what we're talking about.
It really is. And don't treat, if you possibly can, do not treat our employees like lepers once they get in trouble for something.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a process that has to go through for internal investigations, and we don't want to violate, POBR or any of those things. But it doesn't mean we can't talk to them. It doesn't mean we can't treat them like
Yeah.
people. We can't treat them like humans. But it's almost like hot potato, hands are off, and they feel that. And those effects affect them
Yeah.
deeply, deeply. And it shows whether they're valued or not, because people can still be valued in their mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
in their misconduct. They truly can. Even if the misconduct is to the point of termination, you can still treat people like they're people. And I would
Yeah.
just express that we think about that, because oftentimes we just don't want to have anything to do with them. And no, I can't talk to you about the investigation, but I can check in on you. How are you
Still a
doing?
person, right?
How's
And
the
still,
family? How
yeah.
can I support you in other ways? I can encourage you and support you without just shunning you completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge thing. It's like they're still a person, and maybe they made a big mistake, but they still did a lot of really good things in the service of others, and there's a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot to celebrate there. But yeah, I think it is meaningful to discern that. Even when you said like, "Hey, we shouldn't treat officers like lepers," and I'm just going to put this out there because I feel this a certain way where when I promote, I know certain people feel a certain way about the rank, right? And that's not a positive way. And so I've even been sensitive and maybe overly hypersensitive to the fact of like, hey, maybe I'm not going to walk by that room and, shoot the breeze because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. And these are people that I may not have quite the relationship with, but generally, I'm like, man, I got to get that out of my head because if I don't try, then we know where we're going to be. And so I just want to inject that out, right? Because what I was saying earlier, that story about, the AC saying like, they don't want me to be seen. They don't want
They
me to come around.
do.
Like
They
that's what,
do.
and they
Don't
were
come
said,
around.
yeah,
Well, don't come around and be critical. I mean,
yeah,
but
yeah.
come around and just like, if there is like in your briefing rooms or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
just swing by and be like, hey, how was your day today? I
Yeah.
heard a couple of calls on the radio. I mean, that one was kind of whatever. You just make small talk and chat, or
Yeah.
if they're in a break room or something, grab a soda or beverage and just have a seat. And I mean, you just had sports or whatever's going on, and
Right.
see them.
Yeah.
It's a game changer,
Yeah. And I
because
do
now
want to, yeah.
you have advocates and champions for you and the department
Mm-hmm.
that'll start to populate. So when you're dealing with some of those stuff that you're dealing with that you don't think, why are we dealing with that? You got to make more ambassadors out there, and that is by befriending and building those relationships.
Yeah. And so my challenge is, hey, for the officer that perceives, oh man, like that commander doesn't like me, never talks to us, like maybe they feel so uncomfortable, right? Because they feel like there's an aura or a negative kind of vibe, and like it takes two, right? So it's just to invite that, both directions. But yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for the supervisors, just try, right? And even for that supervisor I was talking about, his follow up was that he never wanted, like his generation never wanted to see the boss. And that might be a different time, or maybe it was that specific boss, right? And so for me to know this guy and know where he's coming from, I was like, no, if people got to know you like I do, then it would be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, your people want to see you, and they want to see you in a positive way. They don't want it, like I said, they don't want you to come out and micromanage them and criticize and all of those things. They really want you to come out and just kind of almost like fellowship. It's like
Mm-hmm.
fellowship, like, camaraderie and fellowship and support in a different way. And sure, you will have some of those managers or folks that come out and they'll notice somebody's not wearing the proper accoutrements to their uniform, or their grooming is out of policy, or their uniform is dirty, or whatever. And they're going to make those comments to whoever, and it'll trickle down, and then that could have an adverse effect, right? So you want to be careful with what you see out there in those moments, because yes, I've had to be the one that would have to go back and deliver that information to make sure that their uniforms and all of that, because I had a commissioner or a commander or whoever come out. But in the way that we're working in the environment today with low staffing and all the stressors and all the pressure that are on our folks, that is very real. And law enforcement has always had pressure and always had things. But today, we don't have the staffing, and they're overtaxed, overmaxed. Don't look for the small stuff, because if small things are what you're looking for, like in that fault place, you're going to find them. So go out with a lens to look for the good stuff, the bright spots about your employees, and then tell somebody, so that that then trickles back and they get that affirmation, because that will be exponentially like powerful and different in your organization. It just will.
Yeah. That's so huge. Johnny, I want to be mindful of your time, but there are topics
Okay.
maybe we have to schedule something else. But I wanted to ask you about your book, Black, White, and Blue. I wanted to ask you
Mhm.
about retirement, or like quote unquote retirement, because you transitioned into out of the uniform and the badge, but you're still doing so much uh, completely intertwined with law enforcement culture. So no, truly, I actually do want to ask how much time you have, and then
Yeah, yeah. I
if you
mean,
have
that
time
shouldn't
on
take
those
very
topics.
long. That
Yeah.
shouldn't take very long.
All
And you could
right.
chop this up however you need to.
Okay. Well, let's go. So, black, white, and blue.
Yeah. So, Black, White, and Blue Surviving the Sifting is basically a memoir for me, but it's a memoir around 360 degrees, the holistic me. So, I've been holding this in for 20 plus years, everybody kind of has a book in them that they think they want to put out there and write.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about doing it where it's just all leadership, specifically in policing, and I was approached several times that, that would be the best way. And then I just decided, because it was on my spirit in a different way, and it was in my spirit in a different way because the book reaches people, doesn't reach just law enforcement people. It reaches
Yeah.
people. And the title, Black, White, and Blue, is because I'm half black, I'm half white, and I was blue for almost 30 years of my career. And there is an interesting lived experience through that lens, being a woman, being of color, and then being in policing, and then just being a woman in my life, like with,
Mm-hmm.
marriage and family and childhood, and how you carry that forward from those broken moments, and they become who you are, is how you lead in your leadership. So I kind of share my, you know, uh, chronological experience of work towards my leadership, and intertwine those moments of reflection from past moments of either childhood or moments of other places where I struggled with my own worthiness, my own, belonging because of broken family ties and abandonment issues and difficult experiences as a young teenager to even have accomplished what I did. And, I was grateful to graduate high school, and raised by a single mother who struggled with, addiction to prescription medication, even though she was a registered nurse. And so when she
Mm.
would work, she was my hero. And when she was broken and depressed, she was still my hero, but it was difficult for me to navigate that. I didn't really know my father, who he's African American growing up. I was born in the, late 60s. And so, that definitely wasn't favorable, but it also wasn't favorable, the fact that he was married, so you had all those weird
Yeah.
dynamics, even though I got to know him a little, I didn't know him. But all that affects you in your childhood and into your young adulthood, into this space. And when I decided on the highway patrol, I have nobody in law enforcement, nobody in the military, but it was a big ad in the paper. And I tell this story all the time. And the qualifications were simple. I had a high school diploma. I had, I was 20 and a half, so I didn't have anything criminal or anything. And so I said, I'm going to apply. Literally in 6 months, I was in the academy. So I went from being a typist clerk for the human resources department, seeing people that I went to school with coming in for, assistance through welfare, to going, to Sacramento, about an hour away from where I lived, and I'd never been away from home, to go to the academy for 6 months. And then that was grueling, very difficult. Again, women hadn't been on very long, maybe 10 years or so, 14 years before women actually joined the Highway Patrol, that I was going through the academy. And so it was difficult, but that's a whole nother, I could talk a whole hour on that experience. And then I'm pushed out into Southern California, where I've never been before, worked before. And again, women just aren't accepted, and it's very difficult. And then I navigated my career, and ended up again retiring as an assistant chief. And I chose to retire because at the time I wasn't feeling well. And this is where you have to manage your health and your wellness, through all of that. And it was a good decision because I wanted to have just as many years on that side of working, and I want to try to get just as many on this side working.
Yeah.
But I told my story in the book in a very vulnerable way, that I want people to be able to see themselves, but I also want them to be able to know it's okay. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to be messy, um, because that is really who we are. And we need to be authentic to ourselves. And we have to find those things where we also stop blaming outwardly other people, but also having kind of this self reflection and awareness. Where are the areas do I need to improve myself? Where are the areas that I really need to be honest with myself as I move forward through my broken lens, right? Because I was beginning to lead at different levels through all of this, raising two kids, being married for 18 years to a police officer, and then going through a divorce,
Mm.
having my mother pass away unexpectedly, who had, despite all of the mess we went through growing up, she was still my mom. And then changes in myself as a woman and experiencing those, because also I'm aging, right? So I'm going through my own process of womanhood. My children are growing up. They're going through their experiences as teens. Am I, doing that well as I choose to continue to promote? So women today, you know, um, we all have, but I think they do it much better now in how they sequence their careers around family priorities. And I didn't necessarily see it that way. And I wish that I had been better informed and educated, because it could have probably done it more healthy. I don't know that it could have salvaged necessarily my marriage. Those were so many dynamics in that, being both police officers. But just that whole experience of moving forward, and then the cumulative trauma of my own critical incidents, and then those you start to build in your profile from being a sergeant, being a lieutenant, being a captain, being an assistant chief, of all your people that they experience. You carry all of that. So towards the end of my career, that choice to retire because I wasn't well. I had several surgeries. I'd been sick. Took me a couple of years after I retired to get feeling 100%. Um, it was a difficult time, but I would not change it. I couldn't change it anyway, but I wouldn't change it because it then catapulted me into what do I want to do when I retire. And in transparency, I only had a high school diploma to join the Highway Patrol. And it took me probably till my second child, and I'm working graveyards, that I decided to go back to the junior college and get my AA. And so I was able to get my associates while I was working graves. I had two kids, and I was promoting to sergeant, and I wanted to promote further. And so I also enjoyed going to school. And so I started building myself towards getting a 4-year degree. And so at the time, online schools weren't, thought of very highly,
Hmm.
but I found one that was respectable. It worked with policing, and it allowed me to work my shift, take care of my kids, and do my classwork and meet all the rigor that they required. And so I got my 4-year degree after I promoted to lieutenant. And I was like, okay, I feel pretty good. But towards the end of my career, I had went to command college here in California, which is probably similar to many across different parts of the United States. And so what it did is, when you finished the 18-month command college, it gave you credits to be able to apply if you didn't have a bachelor's for your bachelor's or towards your master's. And so I was like, I want to do that. And so I applied for my master's degree at the University of San Diego. It's a private university here in California, prestigious, down south, beautiful. I wish I lived on campus. Um, and I did that right as I retired. And I literally graduated a year after I retired, a year and a half after I retired. And I shared some feedback from the program. And then they asked me to be a part of their adjunct faculty. And so, because I'm a practitioner in the field for law enforcement and public safety leadership, I'm one of their adjunct professors. And so I enjoy that. And I actually adjunct at the junior college that I graduated from with
Oh,
my
wow.
2-year degree for our post academy. So those are folks coming in who want to do law enforcement. And so 75% of them are sponsored when they come through, and 25 are hoping to be sponsored by the time they end the academy. And I teach a cultural immersion program class for them there, which is new curriculum. And it's just how to work with people through community engagement and see our differences and create this space for them that is not so policy based and all of that, but to create those human qualities in them through emotional intelligence and connectivity. And then it inspired me because I do a lot of work with different organizations. And so I went back for my doctoral degree in organizational change and administration. So I'm in dissertation, as you know, and projected to graduate in April of this year. And so I would say to folks, never be done. If you feel like you still want to contribute, don't put an age on it. Don't put, well, I was a leader and did all this stuff, and how can I go and do these things in transition? You really can't. It just you have to you have to find a space in yourself to find the balance that you need and the cadence that works for you. So yeah, you want to retire and enjoy time with your family. I'm a grandmother. I have two grandchildren. I have a husband. I have a blended family of five young adults. So there's time for all of that. And I do consulting work for organizations. I'm a public speaker, so I go and speak.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asked to speak on national topics to shape policy. Yet here I am sitting at home this morning on this podcast with you, Eric. So all things are possible, and it can make life very vibrant and fun in the second season. And you could have a third season.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to atrophy. I want to continue growing and giving, growing and giving. I like those two G's.
I love that. I love that. There's so much goodness there. There's, going back to young Johnny deciding to be a police officer, and I feel and I hear this same drive. What prompted you back then that is continued to keep your momentum going through today?
Yeah, yeah. So you had said something, we had talked about it earlier about the whole self confidence part of things that kind of show up later. Well, my mother told me there was nothing that I couldn't do.
Hmm.
And I really believed her. Even though I had insecurities, I have values of unworthiness, but not in certain spaces. So when we have those feelings, they're not in everything that we touch. They can just be in particular situations. And that's where I experienced that a lot of time. But I felt confident when I saw the requirements for it. I was like, I had played basketball in high school. I played basketball. I was very athletic in the sense of, playing hoop, and I played hoop with guys. So I was pretty tough. I felt like I was tough. Even though people were like, but, because I did modeling when I was younger too. So I had people that were like, well, you just don't seem like you fit the stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't use the word
Mm-hmm.
stereotype, but you don't fit what an officer should be. And I'm like, well, what's an officer supposed to be? I really didn't even know because I grew up on ships. So in my mind,
Yeah.
you're supposed to be fine. You're supposed to fit in tight uniforms, and then you're supposed to skydive
Yeah.
and surf. So
Yeah.
I didn't have any stereotype in my mind. So for me, I felt like when I saw the ad in the paper, I felt like I could do it, but the thing that really hooked me was the ad told me that I would have vision, health, and dental benefits, and I would have a retirement. Because again, I grew up in a broken with my mother, single
Mm-hmm.
mother,
Yeah.
who was a broken woman. So we were on welfare, we were homeless, we lived with family. We never had security. We never had anything secure. She didn't own our home, we didn't own a car. Whatever we had, I don't know where it came from sometimes. Um, and so when I saw that, I was like, I'm going to be able to take care of myself if I can do this. Because the rest of it physically, I felt like that's not a problem. I just wasn't also prepared for having the mental fortitude and that mental toughness to go through the academy, that paramilitary. So every day I wanted to quit. Every day I was a broken mess. But I thank my company commander and my male allies that were in that academy with me that gave me tips of
Hmm.
things to practically do every day that improved me on my placement in my run so that I didn't come in the end. I came in the middle, came towards the top so I could get to the shower sooner. So I could get showered and dressed and be able to get to breakfast sooner so that I
Hmm.
could eat and have the energy for marching before class. And then when I'm in class all day for 8 hours, I'm not falling asleep. I'm staying awake. I'm able to do my homework. I'm able to go out and do physical methods of rest. So all those little things, how to fold and make my bed, all the stuff that I was like, why are they yelling at everything here?
Loud noises. Yeah.
I got that support and encouragement. And I just feel like that's what kept me in, and that's what kept me going, is that kind of collection and collaboration of those people and those opportunities and those moments. And the fact that I was going to have a secure, I wouldn't have to be, if I did this job and I stayed committed to it. And at the time, it was 75% of your salary based on the three, I think it was three at 50 at the time. And then it increased
Hmm.
over time. But if I did this thing, I would never have to worry about staying in somebody's room in their home. I wouldn't have to worry about what state or city we were going to be living in two or three times, a year. I wouldn't have to worry about being at the Salvation Army to, feed my kids or me. I would never have to do that for me. And if I had children, I didn't know if I was going to be married, but if I was going to have children or any of those things, I wouldn't have to worry about that. I could go to the dentist, which I did, and it was a hot mess when I finally went. But I would have all these things that we never could really do, and I always had to worry about. And it did just that. It's a beautiful career. It's a beautiful career for so many reasons. And if you're hating the profession or you're feeling like you've lost that love for it, I tell you to find it wherever you can. I know it's hard. I know you feel beaten up by the public. I know you sometimes feel beaten up by, the folks in the organization.
Hmm.
Sometimes you feel like you're alone. But I would just encourage you to find things outside of that that help remind you of your why. Because if you stick to it, you stick to it. You too will retire, have a great life. You'll have a great life. I pray my life is another 30 years, but even if it's not another 30 years, it is beautiful when you get here. Believe in that. So, anyway, I could talk about it all day. Um, but that, I think, is a nutshell of your questions. I think that
Yeah.
answered.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so many parallels. You and I, and when I got acquainted with you and got to hear you speak, I was like, man, there's something here, and it's amazing to hear kind of some of where it came from. Um, but I love that you're so vulnerable and you're willing to share your story through your memoir. I haven't read it yet, and I will. That's my commitment, because I know that there's so much that will draw something out of me, or something that I can reflect on, and how I continue to do these pursuits and these projects, which is not to say look at me, but I think you recognize that when you write and you share, someone will get something, right? Someone has been in your similar situation growing up, whether or not they want to be a police officer, right? Whether or not they're mixed race, whether or not they're female, but you certainly have a lot of experiences that are a huge part of your life and shaped your life experience, your human experience. And so that's like a huge reflection point for me as I continue to share in what way I can be helpful. I was literally
Yeah,
talking to my
absolutely.
wife this morning about
Yeah.
writing and potentially
You
writing a book.
should. You should. You should. And
It's
so
scary. It's scary,
it
but
is
the reason why I even
scary.
say it is like my accountability is I'm saying it here so people can ask me about it. And so I started writing.
Oh, okay. Well, starting
But
is good. And so,
yeah.
yeah, it is very, very, because you're vulnerable. But so, like I said, I'm purpose driven. I'm very connected in my spirit and my faith
Mhm.
and how I serve and how, you should be helping others. And so the tail end of my book, at the very end, talks about policing issues very specifically. It's like some of because I went based on a young woman who was interviewing me for her dissertation at the time. And that gave me the inspiration on how to actually frame my book and move forward and to actually get done with it in
Mm.
that space. And so the tail end, I give very specific things to some of the larger issues that we're facing in our country about policing. And I did it specifically because leaders are going to pick up things throughout my book, and then they're going to pick up a lot as they get to the tail end. But I had an officer, he retired as a sergeant, a white male, we're very different personalities and people, but he sent me a message. He goes, Jonni, I read your book. And I was shocked that he would even read my book because I don't think it
Mhm.
would appeal to him. And he said, for one, everybody needs to read it. He goes, but two, it brought me to tears because there was just experiences in there because he had known me over the years that he just had no idea of again, what shapes you, but also what you've had to go through in some of your leadership moments, right? The hard moments. And these aren't moments because I'm just a woman. These are just hard leadership moments.
Yeah.
And so it was very powerful for me to have that kind of validation and affirmation from him. And so I would encourage you, write, and do what you feel comfortable. And so the other book that I have out is this one I did because it is helping people with law enforcement with promotional preparation and readiness. So we know in organizations, most organizations do not have formal promotional preparation webinars or classes or assistance. They put out a bulletin, read policy, here's the reading books,
Yeah.
and here's the criteria to be a sergeant and apply, and that's all you get. And so it was hard for me. It took me 3 times to pass the sergeant's test when I decided to take it. And so after that, I went to a wonderful promotional kind of study group. And I really learned from that lieutenant, from that study group as I was preparing for lieutenant. And I went from being on the bottom of the list, I mean, literally, I think 2 from the bottom of the list, to being in the middle of the lieutenant's list. And using that model, again, to pay it forward and for my officers who did my study group. And I just shaped it and refined it over the years. So when I studied to be a captain, it was a different process. So I learned assessment centers.
Mm-hmm.
So I went the first time I had to take it twice. I went from being in the 5th rank to being in the 1st rank, and 1st rank moving forward from there. But I taught those study groups for my people. And I brought on my sergeants as I promoted. I brought on my lieutenants as I promoted. I made my camp commanders work with their sergeants and lieutenants because you don't want to move too far away from everybody depending on what rank. But really, revise that model so well that over 95% of people that were in my study groups made their lists. Made their list. I couldn't guarantee them positions because those become where you commanders start picking your people.
Yeah, that happens.
That's a different thing.
Yeah, there's so much outside the test, right?
Yeah, so making the list, but then I also built in how to start building their leadership competency because it's not just gaming the test system, it's knowing the inventory and body of work and exposure and experience you need to have leadership roles and leadership opportunities and assignments that also help you. And so the book that I did it's called Survival Guide to Law Enforcement Promotional Preparation. And it is a simple guide that really gives people these things to inventory and assess their readiness, helps them understand written examinations, oral interviews, assessment centers. It gives them scenarios to think about, it gives them how to set up a study schedule and structure, helps people who want to put on study groups for their organizations or departments, things to consider and how to put them together. And yeah, so I did that one out of another passion project. And so now I'm helping organizations, some of them build their professional promotional readiness components for them. So I would just say, if you don't have it, help your people to develop the leadership they need. And if you're looking at succession planning, it doesn't start with your lieutenants and captains. This should be something that you're working to develop your people throughout their career.
Yeah.
Because we talk about building the professionalism of the profession. Well, then do our part. We are bringing in college educated people. In my research I'm doing, 100% of them have a college degree. I think only a couple have a 2-year degree. Majority have a 4-year degree. And several have a master's degree. We have educated people joining law enforcement. Let's not make them widget makers to just be report writing. Let's really tap in and embrace what they bring.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be amazing. And then develop it, and build it, and grow it.
I love that development. And that's one thing that I ask my sergeants now. I ask them, like, who on their crew is going to take their place. And sometimes they're really young crews, and they're like, I don't know. I was like, you got to pick somebody. Like, and they do, right? They identify like, hey, this might be only a few-year officer, but I'm seeing these promising factors. I'm like, cool. Your job is to build that, right? Your job is to develop that. And it might not be official leaders, right? It might not be rank, but I also try to ask them like, hey, who's going to be the game changer of this department? Everyone has to pick 1 or 2 people on their crew, right? They may have 8, 10 officers, but like you have to identify somebody that's going to be leading this department because they will be here when we are not. And that's like that's our game. So
Eric, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So does your organization have like formal goal setting for your officers, or does it just start at some higher
It
level?
it does in a way, but it's loose and there's a huge opportunity there. Like I would love for there to be like kind of a training and like a subdivision of the training unit, which is professional development, and people can almost like a library, which it would include a library, right? But to say like, hey, here's career tracks, here's things to consider, here's development plans. I think that actually is something that's being discussed and talked
It
about.
would
But
be great
yeah,
because most of the, again, in my research, they don't have any goal setting. So, yeah, you have your
yeah,
annual reviews that will
yeah,
talk
we
about performance. And then maybe there's a couple of goals that talk about what do you want to do.
that's
But
what we do. Yeah.
their biggest thing was there's never any follow up
Mm-hmm.
and there's never any action steps on how or what is actually needed that's formal. It's always a conversation
Yeah.
and that's it,
Yeah.
versus having a career development plan and it's written, it's formal, it's in your file, and you know that if this is the career track or path, then these are the type of trainings, this is the type of continued learning you need, these are the job assignment exposures. And we know in smaller departments it's hard to have job rotation because the opportunities may not be there, but where's some of the shadowing, where's maybe some of that exposure if they want to volunteer, or creating that for them is a lot of what I hear that they would like to grow that experience. So maybe I can't be a SWAT officer or a detective or robbery or all these things, but it doesn't mean that if I'm working a really good investigation from the field that I can't work maybe in some way a little bit longer with the detectives as they take it over so that I can learn a little bit of those extra techniques and skills versus
Mm-hmm.
this is all I do and I got to turn it over to them for those that are interested.
Yeah.
But the goal setting was key. Nobody I spoke to had formal goal setting for leadership development and promotional readiness
Mm-hmm.
at your line level.
And that's a huge
Nobody.
gap, right? We do have what you're talking about, which is, hey, your annual review or your change of rotation, so 6 months, a year, you're talking about goals, but oftentimes we aren't holding their feet to the fire, right? A lot of officers say, like, I don't really know, I can't, maybe this one day, and then they scratch it down. And I'm not blaming like supervisors. It's a pressure
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
need
yeah,
to get comfortable with. But
yeah.
with that, what I'm trying to introduce to myself and the people I work with is like, hey, are you giving them critical feedback to help them with blind spots? Because this gentleman over
They
here,
want it. They
yeah,
want
he wants to be a
it.
sergeant, like, and you're talking about potential trainings that are in the box trainings, but are you actually saying, hey man, I see all this promise? Because I agree with this
So just
officer
like you
dude.
just I want to capture that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Just what you said. If they could approach them with that, I see all this promise. Here's some areas for improvement
Mm-hmm.
versus that could sound a whole lot different and it can crush them. Don't
Yeah.
crush them.
Yeah. Because it's
Don't
not like
crush them with
the
your words. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the SIT sandwich that we talk about that everyone says, "Oh, here it comes." Like you're going to say a compliment, then you're going to say where I suck, and then you're going to say another kind of compliment, but I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
Like I read about the how that model's not helpful, and I agree. So with that, I think it doesn't just happen that one conversation. Like it has to happen in your existence together, your coexistence, where they know that you're in their corner, and you show
Yes.
that through deeds and investment and time, and then you say, "Hey, can I give you some direct feedback?" Right? So you ask permission, and just about everyone's going to say yes.
Yeah.
You do all the right things, you say all the right things, and if I were to challenge you, I would invite you to consider this, right? I would consider this as being an opportunity to get outside your comfort zone where you could be more visible to this other group of people or this other type of
Absolutely.
investment.
Visibility
Yeah,
is
so
huge.
it's a
And
thing.
planting those seeds too, because you said something like, well, sergeants say, hey, do you, and they're like, yeah, I don't know. Don't let that hang. Plant a seed of just what you said. Well, I think, if you just continue to do this good work and you get some more experience, I think you'd be great in whatever that specialty unit is. I think you'd be great as a field training officer. I think you'd be great at our academy. I think you'd be, there's some things you need to do. You plant that seed where they feel like you see them and you think they would be great at it. That stuff emerged over and over when a sergeant said something like that to them. They started believing that they could
Mm-hmm.
or they should,
Yeah,
versus you don't say anything to them at all. Then they
yeah,
don't think they should or they could.
yeah. And I want to roll that into maybe one last quick point, but that narrative that we paint for ourselves, right? We talked about limiting beliefs earlier on, you and I. And however, when we give people critical feedback or you give the opportunity to reflect on critical feedback, they can actually have actionable steps towards something, right? I know people that, you talked about how it took you multiple times. I would have never known, right? Because I haven't read your book yet. But I just expect like, yeah, she's grinding, she's working, and she's probably gonna ace it, right? But you had to return several times. But I think most of us know a lot of people that only took the test once, and then they said, "Hey, I'm not cut out for it," or "The bosses don't want me," or whatever, right?
Mhm.
I had that conversation with an officer who was very much wanting to be a sergeant, and what I was trying to get him to understand when he didn't do as well as he wanted, I was like, "All right, it's time to revamp, right? Pick yourself up, make yourself undeniable." And then some kind of political things happen. He's like, "Oh, this is never going to happen." I was like, "It won't, because you just said it, man. If you actually believe that, or how about this? You make yourself undeniable. Like, have the aptitude, have the spirit, have the engagement, study the test. And then if you're number one and you get passed, then you did everything in your control, right? But make them say no to you." And I couldn't help that officer flip the switch. But I share that story because we all have our own limiting beliefs, or we all protect our ego and we don't want to face the music. And I think that there's definitely a necessity to push both of them if we're going to recognize our true potential.
Yeah. So I had a young woman. A lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn. So anybody listening, out to me on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah.
I'd love to connect with you. But she reached out to me because she was experiencing something in her department. She was in a small agency, and she, had all the qualifying criteria and time and different experience and opportunities. And she had put in to be a sergeant, and she had been overlooked. And I think it was maybe a couple of times. I'm not sure. And she said, I just don't know what to do. And I said, well, what are you thinking about doing? What do you want to do? And she goes, I just don't know. I just don't think I'm going to be able to move up here. And I said, well, and this may not be favorable, but I said, well, have you thought about other agencies where you might be able to promote? And so sometimes that is a real consideration. You may not move forward in your agency
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. I mean, some people stay in positions forever, so there's never any movement for one.
Yeah.
And then if there is movement, there's only one or two people that get to move. And there might be somebody that has more seniority, more experience, better qualified, and different reasons that you're not even familiar with. And it just may not happen. So she did. She went to another department and she promoted
Mm-hmm.
into sergeant. And so sometimes those are things you have to think about for yourself, what's going to work best for you. But I think what I told her, and I'd have to look back at my messaging, was I just didn't want it to define who she felt she was because she didn't get the promotion in her department,
Yeah.
and that it was saying something to her as somebody in her character and her leadership, because that's not always the case. There are some cases you need to shape up and some things need to happen. Other things, it's just not your time. This is not your opportunity, but it doesn't mean that you're not qualified or well prepared or able. You are. It just may not be there. That's all.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for the wealth of information you shared with me and everybody else. If there's anything you want to wrap with, and where people can find you, you mentioned LinkedIn and where they can connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is the best. I'd love for you to connect with me there. And if I can be of any service or help you, or you want to run something past me, just message me there. I try to check that at least a couple of times a day. And what I'll leave people with, I guess, is I want to leave you with hope. Okay, because we are talking Blue Grit podcast, correct?
Blue Grit Radio podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, Blue Grit Radio podcast. And so I want to leave you with hope because, every day it's tough, but every day is also a new day. And I know it can sound really cheesy or repetitive because I've said it throughout your podcast, but it's how you show up.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, deciding how I show up every day affects the attitude that I'm going to have and how I'm going to be dealing with people. It helps me with my balance when I'm, balancing work and life and priorities and all these things. And then it also clearly helps me with the choices that I'm going to make throughout the day. And so I call those the ABCs: attitude, balance, and choice. And we have them every single new day. And with them, we can have hope. And I believe that. I believe that. I believe in our profession. I believe in our people who are out there doing the work. And this is every single solitary person who works in the criminal justice field, whatever your title classification may be. This is not just those who are wearing the uniform and the gun. This is
Mm-hmm.
everybody, because everybody matters and everybody is experiencing something. So I feel like hope covers us all and the ABCs covers us all. So I just thank you for having me on, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.